The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval base as Dr. Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her rental car. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her civilian clothes, trying to look professional despite feeling completely out of place. The base was enormous, with buildings stretching as far as she could see and uniformed personnel moving with purpose in every direction. Sarah had never been on a military base before. As a civilian dog trainer and animal behaviorist, her world usually consisted of suburban training facilities and family pets. But 3 weeks ago, everything changed when she received an urgent call from the Navy. They needed her expertise with their working dogs, specifically a group of highly trained German shepherds that had suddenly become aggressive and unmanageable. She pulled her bag from the car and walked toward the main gate, her credentials in hand. The guards examined her paperwork with the same intensity they might use to inspect a potential threat. After what felt like an eternity, they waved her through with directions to Building 47, where she would meet Lieutenant Commander James Rodriguez, the officer in charge of the K-9 unit. The base was bustling with activity. Helicopters flew overhead, their rotors creating a constant background noise. Groups of soldiers jogged past in formation, their boots hitting the pavement in perfect rhythm. Sarah felt small and insignificant among all this military precision. She had built her reputation working with difficult dogs, but this felt different. These weren't family pets with behavioral issues. These were military working dogs trained for combat and protection. Building 47 was a large concrete structure that looked like it had been built to withstand anything. Sarah approached the entrance nervously, still unsure why they had specifically requested her when they surely had their own military dog handlers. The receptionist directed her down a long hallway lined with photographs of military dogs and their handlers. Some of the photos were clearly memorial images, showing dogs who had given their lives in service. The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders as she realized these weren't just animals to these people, they were partners, family members, heroes. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez was waiting for her in his office. He was a tall, stern-looking man in his 40s with graying hair and serious eyes. When Sarah knocked on his door, he looked up from a stack of papers and gestured for her to sit down. "Dr. Mitchell, thank you for coming," he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced she was the right person for the job. "I have to be honest with you. When headquarters told me they were sending a civilian dog trainer, I had my doubts. These aren't house pets we're dealing with." Sarah straightened in her chair, feeling the need to prove herself immediately. "I understand your concerns, Lieutenant Commander, but I've worked with aggressive dogs before. I've rehabilitated animals that others said were beyond help." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same intensity the guards had used to examine her credentials. These dogs were perfectly trained 6 weeks ago. They could follow complex commands, work in high-stress environments, and were completely reliable. Then, something changed. They became aggressive toward their handlers, refused to follow orders, and 2 of them actually attacked during routine exercises. Sarah listened carefully, her mind already working through possibilities. Sudden behavioral changes in well-trained dogs usually had specific causes, medical issues, trauma, or changes in their environment or handling. Have they been examined by veterinarians? Thoroughly. Blood work, X-rays, neurological examinations. Nothing. They're perfectly healthy physically. Rodriguez stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the training grounds. "The thing is, Dr. Mitchell, these dogs are scheduled to deploy with SEAL Team 7 in 3 weeks. If we can't figure out what's wrong with them, we'll have to replace them with untrained animals, which puts our people at risk." The gravity of the situation hit Sarah fully. This wasn't just about fixing behavioral problems. Military personnel would be depending on these dogs in dangerous situations. Lives could hang in the balance. She felt a mixture of excitement at the challenge and terror at the responsibility. "I'd like to observe them interacting with their current handlers," Sarah said. Sometimes the problem isn't with the dogs themselves but with how they're being handled or trained. Rodriguez's expression darkened slightly. Dr. Mitchell, these handlers are Navy SEALs. They're some of the most highly trained individuals in the military. They've been working with dogs for years. Sarah felt the challenge in his words but didn't back down. I understand that, sir, but dogs don't care about human rankings or credentials. They respond to energy, consistency, and leadership. If something in the handling has changed, even subtly, it could cause the behavioral issues you're seeing. The lieutenant commander was quiet for a long moment, clearly not thrilled with the implication that his elite personnel might be the problem. Finally, he nodded. Fine. I'll arrange for you to observe training sessions. But, Dr. Mitchell, I need you to understand something. SEAL Team 7 is deploying whether these dogs are ready or not. We can't delay a mission because of animal behavior problems. Sarah nodded, feeling the pressure building. As they walked toward the training facility, Rodriguez explained more about the dogs' recent behavior. They had become selectively aggressive, calm with some people but hostile toward others. They refused to perform exercises they had done perfectly for years. Most concerning, they seemed to have lost their bond with their handlers, the partnership that was crucial for their effectiveness in the field. The training facility was impressive, a large building with various obstacle courses, training scenarios, and specialized equipment. Through the windows, Sarah could see several large enclosures where the dogs were housed. Even from a distance, she could see they were magnificent animals, powerful, alert, and clearly well cared for despite their behavioral issues. The team is running exercises now, Rodriguez said, leading her toward an observation area. You can watch how they interact. As they approached the training area, Sarah heard shouting and barking. Through the fence, she could see 6 Navy SEALs attempting to work with 4 German Shepherds. The dogs were clearly agitated, pulling against their leashes and showing signs of stress. One handler was struggling with a particularly large dog that seemed determined to go in the opposite direction from where it was being directed. Sarah watched carefully, her trained eye picking up details that others might miss. The handlers were clearly frustrated, their body language tense and aggressive. They were pulling harder on the leashes when the dogs didn't cooperate, raising their voices, and showing the kind of impatience that dogs immediately picked up on. How long has this been going on? Sarah asked. About 6 weeks, like I said. It started gradually but has gotten worse every week. Sarah continued watching, noticing that the dogs seemed more agitated around certain handlers than others. One dog in particular, a female German Shepherd, appeared completely shut down, lying flat on the ground and refusing to move despite increasingly harsh commands from her handler. I need to get closer, Sarah said. I want to see their body language more clearly. Rodriguez led her down to the training area. As they approached the fence, the shouting became clearer. The handlers were using increasingly aggressive tones, and Sarah could see the stress building in both the humans and the dogs. Zeus, heel, one of the SEALs commanded, jerking hard on the leash of a large male dog. The dog pulled back harder, his ears pinned back and his tail low. Sarah could see the dog was shutting down emotionally, overwhelmed by the conflict. That's Petty Officer Williams with Zeus, Rodriguez explained. They used to be perfectly synchronized. Now look at them. Sarah watched Williams struggle with Zeus for several more minutes before she couldn't stay quiet any longer. Excuse me, she called out. Could you try giving him some space? Lower your voice and let him approach you instead of forcing him. Williams stopped and turned toward her with obvious irritation. Ma'am, with respect, I've been handling military dogs for 8 years. I know what I'm doing. I'm sure you do, Sarah replied calmly, but could you try it anyway? Just as an experiment? Williams looked toward Rodriguez, who nodded reluctantly. The SEAL loosened his grip on the leash and stepped back, lowering his voice. Zeus, come. The change in the dog's demeanor was immediate. His ears came forward slightly, and he took a tentative step toward Williams. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Interesting, Rodriguez murmured beside Sarah. Sarah continued watching the other dog handler pairs, noticing similar patterns. The more aggressive and demanding the handlers became, the more the dogs shut down or became reactive. It was a classic escalation cycle that she had seen many times in civilian settings. After an hour of observation, Rodriguez led her back to his office. "So what's your assessment?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "The dogs aren't the primary problem. They're responding to stress and inconsistent leadership. When dogs that are used to clear, calm direction suddenly encounter uncertainty or aggression from their handlers, they become confused and defensive." Rodriguez's jaw tightened. "Are you saying my seals don't know how to handle dogs?" "I'm saying that something has changed in the dynamic between the dogs and handlers. Maybe the handlers are stressed about the upcoming deployment. Maybe there have been personnel changes. Maybe the training routine has been altered. Dogs pick up on everything. So what do you suggest?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I need to work with both the dogs and the handlers. I need to understand what's changed and help rebuild the trust and communication between them." Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. "Dr. Mitchell, these men are Navy SEALs. They're not going to take kindly to a civilian telling them how to do their job. I understand that. But if you want these dogs ready for deployment, we need to fix the relationship issues. The dogs are just responding to what they're sensing from their handlers." The lieutenant commander walked to his window again, staring out at the training grounds. "How much time do you need?" "That depends on how willing everyone is to try new approaches. If the handlers are open to adjusting their methods, we could see improvement quickly. If they're resistant..." Sarah left the sentence hanging. "They'll be resistant," Rodriguez said bluntly. "These are alpha personalities who are used to being in control of every situation." Sarah nodded. "Then, we'll need to show them that being open to different approaches doesn't make them weak. It makes them more effective." Rodriguez turned back to her. "All right, Dr. Mitchell. You'll have access to the dogs and training facilities. I'll arrange for you to work with the handlers. But, understand this, if you can't fix this problem in 2 weeks, we're moving forward with replacement dogs." As Sarah left the building that evening, her mind was racing with plans and concerns. She had worked with difficult dogs before, but never under this kind of pressure. The dogs themselves seemed manageable, their behavioral issues appeared to be reactionary rather than fundamental aggression problems. The real challenge would be working with the handlers. She drove back to her hotel thinking about what she had observed. The SEALs were clearly skilled and dedicated, but they were also frustrated and under pressure. That frustration was feeding into their interactions with the dogs, creating a negative cycle that was getting worse each day. That night, Sarah lay in her hotel bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the female dog she had seen shut down completely during training. There had been something in that dog's eyes that reminded her of animals she had worked with who had experienced trauma. Tomorrow, she would start by building relationships with the dogs individually, away from the pressure of group training exercises. She thought about her conversation with Rodriguez and his skepticism about her methods. She had faced doubt before. Many traditional dog trainers looked down on her more gentle, psychology-based approaches. But Sarah had learned that force and dominance rarely solved behavioral problems permanently. Real change came from understanding and trust. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah made a mental note to be patient with both the dogs and the handlers. Everyone involved was under enormous pressure, and that pressure was manifesting in ways that were making the situation worse. Her job wasn't just to train dogs, it was to help rebuild a team that had somehow lost its way. Sarah arrived at the base early the next morning, determined to make progress with both the dogs and their handlers. She had spent most of the night researching military dog training protocols and thinking about how to approach the situation diplomatically. The last thing she wanted was to create more tension by appearing to criticize the SEALs' methods directly. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez met her at the entrance to the training facility. "The team is already here," he said, his tone neutral but his expression suggesting he wasn't entirely optimistic about how the day would go. "I've briefed them about your background and told them to cooperate fully." As they walked toward the kennel area, Sarah could hear voices and barking from inside. The sounds were tense, sharp commands followed by frustrated responses from both humans and dogs. She took a deep breath, knowing that the energy she brought into this situation would be crucial. "Before I meet with the handlers," Sarah said, "I'd like to spend some time with each dog individually. I want to assess their baseline behavior when they're not under pressure." Rodriguez nodded and led her to the kennel area. The facility was impressively clean and well-maintained. Each dog had a spacious run with access to both indoor and outdoor areas. Despite their behavioral issues, it was clear these animals were well cared for physically. The first dog Sarah approached was Zeus, the large male German shepherd she had seen struggling with Petty Officer Williams the day before. When she approached his kennel, Zeus was lying in the far corner, his head resting on his paws but his eyes alert and watching her every movement. "Hey there, big guy," Sarah said softly, not making direct eye contact, which dogs could interpret as threatening. Instead, she sat down on the ground outside his kennel and simply existed in his space, letting him observe her without pressure. Zeus watched her for several minutes without moving. Sarah noticed that his body language wasn't aggressive, his ears were forward, not pinned back, and his tail wasn't tucked. He appeared more resigned than angry, which told her a lot about his emotional state. After about 10 minutes, Zeus slowly got up and walked to the front of his kennel. He sniffed in Sarah's direction, his nose working to gather information about this new person. Sarah remained still, letting him investigate on his terms. "That's the most interest he's shown in anyone in weeks," came a voice behind her. Sarah turned to see a tall, muscular man in his 30s approaching. His uniform indicated he was a petty officer, and his confident stride suggested he was comfortable in this environment. "You must be Petty Officer Williams," Sarah said, standing up slowly so as not to startle Zeus. "That's right. Tom Williams." He extended his hand, and Sarah noticed his grip was firm but not aggressive. "I have to say, I'm curious about your approach. Most dog trainers I've worked with focus on dominance and control." Sarah appreciated his directness. Dogs respond to clear leadership, but that doesn't always mean force. Zeus here seems stressed rather than aggressive. When dogs are stressed, forcing them to comply usually makes things worse. Williams looked at Zeus, who had backed away slightly when the conversation started but was still watching them with interest. He used to be so eager to work. Now it's like pulling teeth to get him to do anything. "Tell me about what changed 6 weeks ago," Sarah said. "Was there a specific incident, or did the behavioral problems develop gradually?" Williams thought for a moment. "It started small." Zeus would hesitate before following commands he knew perfectly. Then, he started being more resistant during training. Within a couple of weeks, all the dogs were having similar problems. Sarah made mental notes as she moved to the next kennel. The female German shepherd she had seen shut down the day before was named Luna. When Sarah approached, Luna immediately moved to the back of her kennel and lay down flat, her body language screaming submission and fear. This concerned Sarah more than Zeus's behavior. While Zeus seemed confused and frustrated, Luna appeared to be experiencing something closer to trauma response. Sarah sat down again, this time even further from the kennel, giving Luna maximum space. "Luna's the worst of them," Williams said. "She barely responds to anything anymore. Her handler, Chief Torres, is about ready to recommend she be removed from service entirely." Sarah observed Luna carefully. The dog was breathing rapidly despite being at rest, her eyes darting around nervously. These were classic signs of chronic stress and anxiety. Something had fundamentally shaken Luna's confidence. "I'd like to work with her one-on-one," Sarah said. Away from the training environment and, without her handler present initially. Williams looked skeptical. "Chief Torres isn't going to like that. He's been working with Luna for 3 years. I understand, but sometimes dogs need a complete reset when they've become this stressed. If she associates her current environment and handling with anxiety, we need to break that pattern." As they continued through the kennels, Sarah met the other dogs, Atlas, a confident male who seemed less affected than the others, Ranger, who showed signs of frustration similar to Zeus, and, finally, Ace, a younger dog who appeared to be feeding off the anxiety of the others. Each dog showed different symptoms, but there was a common thread of stress and uncertainty. Sarah began forming a theory about what might have happened, but she needed to understand more about the handlers and their recent experiences. "Can you tell me about any changes in the team over the past couple of months?" Sarah asked Williams as they headed toward the main training area. "New personnel, different training protocols, anything that might have altered the routine?" Williams was quiet for a moment. "Well, Chief Torres took over as lead handler about 2 months ago when our previous chief retired. And we've been training more intensively for this deployment than usual." This was potentially significant information. A change in leadership, even a good one, could disrupt established routines and relationships. If Chief Torres had a different handling style than his predecessor, it could explain the dog's confusion and stress. They entered the main training area where the rest of SEAL Team 7 was preparing for the morning session. Sarah counted 5 other men, all in their 20s and 30s, all carrying themselves with the confident bearing she was beginning to associate with Special Forces personnel. "Team, this is Dr. Mitchell, the civilian dog trainer I told you about," Williams announced. Sarah noticed he didn't use her title, which was likely intentional, a way of establishing the hierarchy from the start. The men acknowledged her with polite nods, but Sarah could sense their skepticism. One man in particular, who appeared to be in his early 40s with graying temples and sergeant chevrons, looked openly doubtful about her presence. "That's Chief Torres," Williams said quietly. "Luna's handler." Chief Torres stepped forward. "Dr. Mitchell, I appreciate you coming out, but I have to be honest. These dogs have been through intensive training with military specialists. I'm not sure what a civilian trainer can do that we haven't already tried." Sarah had expected this attitude and had prepared for it. "Chief Torres, I'm not here to replace your training or question your methods. I'm here because sometimes an outside perspective can identify things that people close to a situation might miss." "Such as?" Torres asked, his tone challenging but not hostile. "Such as the possibility that the dogs are responding to stress in their environment rather than having fundamental behavioral problems. When highly trained animals suddenly develop issues, it's often because something in their world has changed in a way that confuses or frightens them." Torres's expression softened slightly. "These dogs don't frighten easily. They're trained for combat situations." "That's exactly why their current behavior is so concerning," Sarah replied. "Dogs that are confident in dangerous situations don't usually become fearful without a significant cause." Another team member, a younger man with corporal stripes, spoke up. "So what do you think is causing it?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "I think there may have been changes in handling or routine that have created uncertainty for the dogs. They're not sure what's expected of them anymore, so they're defaulting to defensive behaviors." She could see the team members exchanging glances. These were clearly intelligent men who were beginning to consider her perspective, even if they weren't entirely convinced. "Here's what I'd like to try," Sarah continued. "I want to work with each dog individually, away from the group training environment. I want to rebuild their confidence through positive reinforcement and clear communication." Once they're responding better individually, we can gradually reintroduce them to group work. Chief Torres frowned. Dr. Mitchell, we don't have time for a complete retraining program. These dogs need to be ready for deployment in 2 weeks. I understand the timeline, but, Chief, if these dogs deploy in their current state, they'll be unreliable in the field. That puts your team at risk. The weight of her words settled over the group. Sarah could see that this was the argument that resonated most strongly. These men might question her methods, but they wouldn't take unnecessary risks with their teammates' safety. All right, Torres said finally. What do you need? Sarah felt a surge of relief. Access to the dogs individually, space to work without interference, and your willingness to modify your handling approach based on what we learn. Torres nodded reluctantly. You've got it. But, Dr. Mitchell, if this doesn't work, we're moving forward with replacement dogs. The first individual session was with Zeus and Williams. Sarah had chosen to start with them because Williams seemed most open to trying different approaches, and Zeus appeared to be the least traumatized of the group. They moved to a smaller training area away from the other dogs and handlers. Sarah noticed immediately that Zeus seemed more relaxed in this environment, his body language less tense than it had been during group training. What I want you to do is completely ignore Zeus for the first few minutes, Sarah instructed Williams. Don't give him commands, don't try to engage with him. Just let him exist in the space with you. Williams looked confused. Ma'am, that goes against everything I've been taught about maintaining dominance and control. I understand, but right now Zeus is associating interaction with you with stress and conflict. We need to break that pattern. Once he relaxes and starts showing interest in engaging, then we'll begin working. Williams followed her instructions, though Sarah could see it was difficult for him. He was clearly accustomed to being in charge and directing every aspect of the interaction. Zeus initially stood at the far end of the training area, watching Williams warily. After several minutes, his posture began to relax. His tail came up slightly, and he started sniffing around the area with more interest. Now, Sarah said quietly, call his name in a happy, relaxed voice. Don't give him a command, just let him know you're aware of him. Zeus, Williams called, his voice notably softer than Sarah had heard him use before. The dog's ears perked up, and he looked directly at Williams for the first time. Perfect. Now praise him for that attention, even though he didn't do anything specific. Good boy, Zeus, Williams said, and Sarah was pleased to hear genuine warmth in his voice. Zeus took a step toward Williams, his tail wagging slightly. It was a small gesture, but it represented a significant improvement in their communication. Over the next hour, Sarah guided Williams through a series of exercises designed to rebuild Zeus's confidence and their partnership. Instead of demanding compliance, Williams learned to request cooperation and reward every positive response, no matter how small. By the end of the session, Zeus was following basic commands reliably and seemed genuinely happy to be working with Williams. The transformation was remarkable, and Sarah could see that Williams was beginning to understand her approach. I have to admit, Williams said as they walked Zeus back to his kennel, I didn't think this would work. I was sure we needed to be more firm with him, not less. Dogs need clarity and consistency more than they need dominance, Sarah explained. When Zeus was confused about what you wanted from him, forcing him to comply just made him more anxious. Once he understood that cooperation led to positive outcomes, he was eager to work with you. Williams nodded thoughtfully. This is going to be a big adjustment for all of us. We're trained to take charge and control situations. You can still be in charge, Sarah said. Leadership doesn't always mean force. Sometimes the most effective leaders are those who inspire others to want to follow them. That afternoon, Sarah worked with Chief Torres and Luna. This session was more challenging because Luna's stress response was more severe, and Torres was clearly frustrated with his dog's lack of responsiveness. Luna entered the training area in a state of high anxiety, immediately moving to a corner and lying down flat. Torres's instinct was to call her over and insist she engage, but Sarah asked him to wait. "Chief, Luna is essentially having a panic attack right now. If we force her to interact, we'll reinforce her belief that this environment is threatening." Torres watched his dog with growing concern. She wasn't like this before. Luna used to be confident, eager to work. Sarah studied Luna's body language carefully. The dog was exhibiting signs of learned helplessness, a state where an animal becomes passive because previous attempts to respond correctly have failed or been punished. "Chief, I need to ask you some difficult questions. Has your handling style changed recently? Has the training intensity increased?" Torres was quiet for a long moment. "When I took over as lead handler, I wanted to make sure our standards didn't slip. I may have been more demanding than my predecessor." Sarah could see the realization dawning on him. Luna is a sensitive dog. If she was used to a gentler approach and, suddenly, faced higher expectations and stricter correction, it could have overwhelmed her. "So this is my fault?" Torres's voice was tight with emotion. "It's not about fault," Sarah said gently. "It's about understanding what happened so we can fix it. Luna hasn't stopped being a good dog. She's just lost confidence in her ability to succeed." The session with Luna was slow and patient. Sarah had Torres sit quietly while she worked on simply getting Luna to stand up and move around the space. Every tiny sign of confidence was rewarded with gentle praise and treats. By the end of the hour, Luna was standing and had even approached Torres voluntarily, though she was still clearly nervous. It was progress, but Sarah knew Luna would need more time and patience than the other dogs. That evening, Sarah met with Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez to update him on the day's progress. She was cautiously optimistic about Zeus and hopeful about the other dogs, but concerned about Luna's condition. "The good news is that these behavioral problems are correctable," Sarah reported. "The dogs haven't lost their training or their abilities. They've lost confidence in their handlers and in the training environment." Rodriguez listened carefully as Sarah explained her assessment and the changes she was implementing. She could see him weighing her progress against the approaching deadline. "How quickly can you get them ready?" he asked. "Most of them should show significant improvement within a week if the handlers are willing to adjust their methods. Luna may take longer." Rodriguez nodded. "And what about the handlers? Are they buying into your approach?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "Williams is very receptive. Torres is struggling but willing to try. The others are still skeptical but not hostile." "That's more cooperation than I expected," Rodriguez admitted. "These men aren't used to being told their methods need adjustment." As Sarah drove back to her hotel that night, she felt cautiously optimistic. The day had shown her that the dog's problems were indeed correctable, and, most importantly, she had begun to gain the handler's trust and cooperation. The real test would be whether they could maintain these new approaches under pressure and whether the improvements would hold when they returned to group training scenarios. She thought about Chief Torres and his visible struggle with the idea that his well-intentioned leadership had contributed to Luna's problems. She had seen this before with well-meaning handlers who confused firmness with harshness. The key would be helping him understand that gentle leadership could be just as effective as strict control, and often more so. Tomorrow, she would work with the remaining dogs and their handlers, and begin the process of gradually reintegrating the improved partnerships into group scenarios. The clock was ticking toward deployment, but for the first time since arriving at the base, Sarah believed they could actually solve this problem in time. The third day brought unexpected challenges. Sarah arrived at the base to find the training facility in chaos. One of the dogs, Ranger, had somehow gotten loose during the early morning routine and was now cornered in an equipment shed, refusing to come out despite the efforts of 3 SEALs. "What happened?" Sarah asked Williams, who was standing outside the shed looking frustrated. Rodriguez was bringing Ranger out for morning exercise when something spooked him. He broke free and ran in here. We've been trying to get him out for an hour, but he just retreats further back every time we approach. Sarah could hear Ranger panting heavily inside the shed, the sound indicating high stress. Through the partially open door, she could see the dog pressed against the far wall, his eyes wide with what looked like panic. Has anyone tried just leaving him alone? Sarah asked. We can't just leave him in there, said Corporal Martinez, one of the younger team members. He could hurt himself or damage equipment. Sarah studied the situation carefully. The shed was filled with training equipment, obstacles, ropes, and various tools. Ranger had positioned himself behind a stack of mats, creating a barrier between himself and the door. His body language suggested he was in full flight mode, driven by panic rather than rational thought. I need everyone to step back, Sarah said. Way back. Give him space to not feel trapped. The SEALs exchanged glances but complied, moving about 50 feet away from the shed. Sarah approached slowly, not heading directly for the door but angling her approach to appear less threatening. Ranger, she called softly, not commanding but just acknowledging his presence. The panting continued, but she heard a slight shift in his position. Sarah sat down about 10 feet from the shed door, making herself appear smaller and less threatening. She began talking in a calm, quiet voice, not to give commands but simply to provide a steady, non-threatening presence. It's okay, buddy. Nobody's going to force you to do anything. Take your time. Behind her, she could hear the SEALs talking quietly among themselves. She caught fragments of their conversation, discussions about time pressure, upcoming training schedules, and questions about whether they should just wait for Ranger to calm down naturally or take more direct action. After about 20 minutes, Sarah heard Ranger moving inside the shed. His breathing had slowed slightly, though he was still clearly stressed. She continued her patient vigil, occasionally speaking to him in soothing tones but mostly just providing calm presence. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez arrived during this standoff, his expression showing both concern and frustration with the delay to the day's training schedule. He approached Sarah but kept his voice low. How long is this going to take? He asked. That depends on Ranger, Sarah replied. If we try to rush him, we could make things worse. He's already in a panic state. Adding pressure will just reinforce his belief that this environment is dangerous. Rodriguez looked at his watch. We have a full training schedule today. Sarah understood the pressure he was under, but she also knew that handling this situation wrong could set back all the progress they had made. Sir, if we force Ranger out of there while he's in this state, it will damage his trust in his handlers. We could lose days or weeks of progress. As if responding to her prediction, Ranger's head appeared cautiously at the edge of the door. He was still pressed against the wall, but he was no longer hiding completely. Sarah remained motionless, not wanting to startle him back into full retreat. Good boy, she said quietly. You're okay. Ranger took a small step toward the door, then froze when he saw the group of people watching him. Sarah could see his internal conflict, the desire to return to familiar people versus his fear of the situation. Everyone needs to turn around, Sarah said. Don't look at him directly. Let him decide to come out without feeling like he's being watched by a crowd. The SEALs turned away reluctantly. Sarah could sense their discomfort with what probably felt like giving in to the dog's fear, but she also noticed they were beginning to trust her judgment. After another 10 minutes, Ranger emerged from the shed. He was still obviously stressed, his tail tucked and his movements cautious, but he was no longer trapped by his own panic. Sarah remained seated, letting him approach her on his own terms. When Ranger reached her, he was trembling slightly. Sarah slowly extended her hand, palm up, letting him smell her before gently scratching behind his ears. The contact seemed to help ground him, and his breathing began to return to normal. "What do you think spooked him?" Williams asked, approaching slowly. Sarah looked toward Rodriguez, Ranger's handler. The young man looked embarrassed and frustrated. "I don't know. We were just walking to the exercise area like we do every morning." He suddenly pulled back hard and broke free. Sarah studied Ranger's behavior and the path from the kennels to where they currently stood. Something had triggered a fear response, but, without knowing what it was, they couldn't prevent it from happening again. "Let's walk back toward the kennels slowly," Sarah suggested. "Maybe we can identify what scared him." The group moved as a unit, with Sarah and Ranger in the center. Ranger was still nervous but seemed calmer with the support of the group. About halfway back to the kennels, near a large ventilation unit, Ranger suddenly tensed again. Sarah felt him pull slightly against his leash and saw his ears go back. "Stop," she said to the group. "Something here is bothering him." They all looked around, trying to identify what might be causing Ranger's reaction. The area looked normal: concrete buildings, equipment, nothing obviously threatening. Then, Sarah heard it, a low, mechanical humming sound coming from the ventilation system. "When was that unit serviced last?" she asked Rodriguez. "Yesterday, I think." "Why?" Sarah knelt down near Ranger, observing his behavior more closely. He was focused on the sound, his body tense but not panicked like before. "Dogs hear frequencies we can't. If they changed something in the motor or fan, it might be producing a sound that's bothering him." It was a simple explanation, but it made sense. A new, unfamiliar sound in a familiar environment could be enough to unsettle a dog, especially one whose confidence had already been shaken. They took a different route back to the kennels, and Ranger remained calm throughout the walk. It was a small victory, but an important one. They had identified a specific trigger and found a way to work around it without forcing Ranger to endure something that frightened him. "That's the kind of thing we need to watch for," Sarah explained to the team as they secured Ranger in his kennel. "These dogs are trained to notice details in their environment. When something changes unexpectedly, it can throw off their entire sense of security." Chief Torres, who had been watching the entire incident, spoke up. "So we need to be more aware of environmental factors that might affect them." "Exactly. And we need to remember that when a dog is scared or stressed, forcing them to tough it out doesn't build confidence. It just teaches them that their handlers won't help them when they're afraid." The morning incident with Ranger actually proved to be beneficial for the team's understanding of Sarah's approach. They had seen firsthand how patience and reading the dog's emotional state led to a better outcome than force would have achieved. The afternoon training sessions built on this foundation. Sarah worked with each handler and dog pair, focusing on communication and trust building rather than strict obedience. The improvements were becoming more consistent. Atlas, the confident male dog, responded quickly to the adjusted handling techniques. His handler, Petty Officer Chen, was naturally more relaxed in his approach, and Atlas seemed to thrive with the clearer communication and positive reinforcement. "I have to admit," Chen said as Atlas completed a complex obstacle course with enthusiasm, "this feels more like partnership than just giving orders." "That's exactly what it should feel like," Sarah replied. "These dogs want to work with you. They want to succeed. When they understand what you're asking and believe they can succeed, they're eager to try." Ace, the younger dog, was also showing significant improvement. His handler, Corporal Davis, had initially been skeptical of Sarah's methods but was becoming a convert as he saw how much more responsive Ace became when their interactions were positive rather than demanding. The biggest challenge remained Luna and Chief Torres. Luna's progress was slower and more fragile than the others. She would show improvement during individual sessions, but any increase in pressure or intensity would cause her to shut down again. "I'm worried about her," Torres confided to Sarah during a break. "Even if we can get her functional for daily tasks, I don't know if she'll be reliable in a high-stress deployment situation." Sarah shared his concern. Luna's confidence had been more deeply shaken than the other dogs, and rebuilding it would take time they didn't have. But she wasn't ready to give up on the dog yet. "Chief, tell me about Luna before the problems started. What was she like?" Torres's expression softened. "She was incredible. Fearless, intelligent, intuitive. She could read situations and respond before I even gave commands. She was the kind of dog that made you a better handler just by working with her." "That dog is still in there," Sarah said firmly. "We just need to help her remember who she is." That evening, Sarah made a decision that she knew would be controversial. She asked Rodriguez for permission to take Luna home with her overnight. "Absolutely not," was his immediate response. "These are military working dogs, not pets. They don't leave the base. Sir, Luna needs a complete break from this environment. She's associating everything here with stress and failure. One night away from the training facility might help reset her emotional state." Rodriguez stared at her as if she had suggested taking classified documents home. "Dr. Mitchell, these dogs are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars each. They're trained assets, not therapy animals." Sarah understood his position, but she also knew that traditional approaches weren't working with Luna. "What if Chief Torres came with us? What if we treated it as an extended training session in a different environment?" The negotiation took nearly an hour, but eventually Rodriguez agreed to a modified version of Sarah's plan. She could take Luna to a neutral location, a park off base, for an extended evening session, but Torres had to be present, and they had to return the dog to the facility by midnight. Torres was initially as skeptical as Rodriguez had been. "Ma'am, Luna doesn't need a field trip. She needs training." "Chief, sometimes the most effective training happens when it doesn't feel like training. Luna has started to associate formal training environments with stress. We need to help her remember that working with you can be enjoyable." The park Sarah chose was quiet and spacious, with open grass areas and walking trails. When they arrived, Luna seemed immediately more relaxed. Her posture was still cautious, but she wasn't exhibiting the extreme stress responses they had been seeing on base. "Don't think of this as training," Sarah instructed Torres. "Think of it as just spending time with your dog. Let her explore, follow her lead for a while." Torres removed Luna's training collar and replaced it with a simple leash. At first, he seemed uncomfortable with the lack of structure, but as Luna began to show genuine interest in her surroundings, he started to relax as well. Luna sniffed around the grass, investigated interesting smells, and even showed brief moments of playfulness, behaviors they hadn't seen from her in weeks. Most importantly, she began to seek out Torres's attention voluntarily rather than avoiding interaction with him. "This is more like the Luna I remember," Torres said as the dog approached him with her tail wagging slightly. Sarah had them practice basic commands in this relaxed setting, using the same positive reinforcement techniques but without the pressure of formal training. Luna responded much better, showing flashes of her former confidence and eagerness to work. As they walked back to their vehicle at the end of the evening, Torres was quiet. Finally, he spoke. "I think I understand what went wrong. When I took over as lead handler, I was so focused on maintaining high standards that I forgot these dogs are individuals with different needs." "It's easy to do," Sarah replied. "Especially when you're under pressure to perform. But acknowledging what happened is the first step to fixing it." When they returned Luna to her kennel that night, she seemed more settled than she had in weeks. She wasn't completely back to her former self, but the spark of confidence was returning. The next morning brought news that would test everything they had accomplished. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez called an emergency meeting with Sarah and the SEAL team. "I've received word that our deployment timeline has been moved up," Rodriguez announced. "We need to be ready in 1 week instead of 2. The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. Sarah felt her stomach drop, knowing that while they had made significant progress, most of the dogs still needed more time to fully restore their confidence and reliability. "Sir," Chief Torres spoke up, "the dogs are improving rapidly, but they're not ready for deployment yet." "Then, we make them ready," Rodriguez replied firmly. "This mission can't be delayed." Sarah looked around the room at the SEALs she had been working with. She could see the conflict in their faces. They had begun to believe in her methods, but they were also military personnel who understood the realities of operational demands. "We can do this," Sarah said, surprising herself with her confidence. "But we need to intensify our approach and make sure everyone is completely committed to the new handling methods." Williams leaned forward. "What do you need from us?" "I need you to trust the process completely, even when it feels unnatural. I need you to remember that these dogs want to work with you, and they're capable of incredible things when they feel supported rather than pressured." Rodriguez was watching Sarah carefully. "Dr. Mitchell, if these dogs aren't ready and it compromises the mission." "They'll be ready," Sarah said firmly. "But not if we panic and revert to the old methods that caused these problems in the first place." As the meeting broke up, Sarah realized that the next week would test not just the dog's recovery, but her own ability to guide both the animals and their handlers through an accelerated training program under intense pressure. Everything they had learned about patience and trust would be challenged by the urgent demands of military reality. The accelerated timeline changed everything. Sarah knew she had to push harder while somehow maintaining the trust and confidence they had spent days building. It seemed like an impossible balance, but the alternative, sending unreliable dogs into combat, was unthinkable. She arrived at the base before dawn, determined to maximize every available hour. The kennels were quiet except for the soft sounds of dogs shifting in their sleep. Sarah took a moment to observe each animal, assessing their body language even at rest. Zeus looked relaxed, Atlas was alert but calm, and even Ranger seemed peaceful. Luna was still more restless than the others, but even she appeared less stressed than when Sarah had first arrived. The first crisis came early in the morning. During routine equipment checks, one of the military working dog vests that the dogs wore during operations was discovered to be damaged. While they waited for a replacement, Sarah suggested they use the delay productively. "Let's work on confidence building with equipment," she told the assembled handlers. "One of the things that can throw off a dog in the field is if they're uncomfortable or uncertain about their gear." She had each handler practice putting on and removing their dog's vest multiple times, but instead of treating it as a routine chore, she had them turn it into a positive experience. The dogs learned to associate the gear with exciting work rather than just obligation. The gear should signal to them that something important and interesting is about to happen, Sarah explained as Zeus eagerly pushed his head through his vest while Williams held it. "Not that they're about to be put to work whether they like it or not." Petty Officer Chen, working with Atlas, was amazed at the difference. He used to tolerate the vest. Now he's actually excited to put it on. The morning training session focused on building reliability under mild stress. Sarah gradually increased the complexity of the exercises while maintaining the supportive, positive communication they had developed. She watched carefully for signs that any dog was becoming overwhelmed, ready to dial back the pressure if needed. The breakthrough came when Chief Torres and Luna completed their first perfect sequence of commands in over a month. Luna moved through a series of obstacles and detection exercises with something approaching her former confidence. When she finished, Torres couldn't hide his emotion. "That's my dog," he said quietly, his voice thick. "That's the Luna I remember." Sarah felt a surge of relief and pride, but she also knew this was just one session. The real test would be maintaining this progress under increasing pressure. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez appeared midway through the morning, bringing with him a visitor who immediately commanded everyone's attention. The man was clearly senior military, with stars on his uniform and the bearing of someone accustomed to being in charge. "General Morrison," Rodriguez said, "may I present Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the civilian specialist we brought in to work with the dogs." General Morrison studied Sarah with sharp eyes. She felt distinctly aware of her civilian clothes and civilian status in this intensely military environment. Dr. Mitchell, I understand you've been making progress with our problem dogs. Yes, sir, significant progress. The behavioral issues were primarily communication and confidence problems rather than fundamental training failures. The general nodded, but his expression remained serious. I need to be direct with you, Doctor. This mission is critical. We cannot afford equipment failures, and these dogs are equipment as far as the military is concerned. If there's any doubt about their reliability, we need to know now. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders again. These weren't just training exercises anymore. Real people would be depending on these dogs in dangerous situations. General, I believe these dogs will be ready, but I need to be honest about their current status. 4 of the 5 dogs are showing excellent improvement and should be fully reliable by deployment. 1 dog, Luna, is making progress but will require careful handling to maintain her confidence. General Morrison looked toward Luna, who was resting nearby with Torres. Chief Torres, what's your assessment of your dog's readiness? Torres straightened. Sir, Luna is not yet at her previous level, but she's improving daily. With continued work, I believe she'll be deployment ready. Believe isn't good enough, Chief. I need certainty. Sarah stepped forward. General, with respect, certainty about animal behavior is something no one can provide completely. What I can tell you is that Luna's issues stem from confidence problems, not ability problems. She still has all her training and skills. If we can maintain her confidence during deployment, she'll perform well. The general was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the options. Dr. Mitchell, I'm giving you 4 more days. At that point, I need a definitive recommendation about each dog's readiness. If you have any doubts, speak up. Better to deploy with 4 reliable dogs than 5 questionable ones. After the general left, the training intensity increased noticeably. Sarah could feel the pressure affecting everyone, handlers and dogs alike. She knew she had to address this before the stress started undermining their progress. Gather around, she called to the team. I need to talk to all of you about pressure and performance. The SEALs formed a semicircle around her, their faces serious and attentive. I know you're all feeling the pressure of the timeline and the general's visit. That's natural and understandable. But I need you to remember that dogs are incredibly sensitive to human emotional states. If you're tense and anxious, they'll pick up on that energy. Williams nodded. So how do we handle that? We can't just stop feeling pressure. You don't stop feeling it, but you manage how you express it. When you're working with your dog, focus completely on that moment and that relationship. Put the external pressure aside temporarily. Sarah demonstrated with Zeus, showing how calm, focused energy could coexist with serious, intensive training. The dog responded to the clarity and confidence in her handling, performing complex exercises with enthusiasm despite the challenging environment. See how Zeus is reading my energy? He knows this is serious work, but he also knows I believe in him. That's the balance we need. The afternoon brought a new challenge, simulated combat conditions. The dogs needed to prove they could work effectively with gunfire, explosions, and other battlefield stressors. Sarah watched nervously as the team prepared the exercise area with blank ammunition and noise simulators. Atlas and Chen went first. Atlas had always been the most confident of the dogs, and the added noise seemed to sharpen his focus rather than distract him. He moved through his detection routine smoothly, indicating targets clearly despite the chaos around him. Zeus and Williams were next. Sarah held her breath as the first simulated explosion went off. Zeus startled but didn't panic, and Williams's calm, encouraging voice helped him refocus quickly. They completed their exercise successfully, though not quite as smoothly as Atlas had. Ranger and Rodriguez faced the test with good results. The morning's incident with the ventilation noise seemed to have helped Ranger become more adaptable to unexpected sounds. He worked through the exercise methodically, showing good focus despite the distractions. Ace, the youngest dog, struggled initially with the noise but recovered with Davis's patient encouragement. It wasn't perfect, but it showed that the dog could adapt and continue working even when stressed. Then came Luna and Torres. Sarah could see Luna's anxiety increase as soon as the noise simulators were activated. Her body language showed the beginning of a stress response, and Sarah knew this could undo weeks of progress if handled poorly. "Chief, remember what we learned about energy and confidence," Sarah called out. "Luna is looking to you for guidance about whether this situation is safe." Torres took a deep breath and visibly relaxed his posture. He spoke to Luna in the calm, encouraging tone he had been practicing. "Luna, we've got this. Let's go to work." Luna hesitated for a moment, clearly struggling with her fear response. Then, something shifted. She looked at Torres, seemed to draw confidence from his calm demeanor, and began working. She moved more cautiously than the other dogs, but she moved. When a particularly loud explosion went off nearby, she stopped and looked to Torres for reassurance. "Good girl, Luna. Keep going," Torres said, his voice steady and supportive. Luna finished the exercise. It wasn't her best work, but she had functioned under stress without shutting down. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and pride watching the partnership between Torres and Luna finding its footing again. That evening, Sarah was reviewing the day's progress in her hotel room when her phone rang. It was Rodriguez. "Dr. Mitchell, we need to talk. Can you come back to the base?" Sarah's stomach tightened. "Is something wrong with one of the dogs?" "Not exactly. Just, we need to discuss something important." Sarah drove back to the base with growing anxiety. When she arrived, Rodriguez was waiting for her in his office along with Chief Torres. Both men looked serious. "Dr. Mitchell," Rodriguez began, "we've been thinking about the deployment and the dog's readiness. We have a proposal." Sarah sat down, unsure where this conversation was headed. Torres spoke up. "We want you to come with us." Sarah blinked, certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "On the deployment," Rodriguez clarified. "As a civilian contractor specialist. Your presence would help ensure the dogs maintain their improved performance under operational stress." Sarah felt her world tilt. I'm not military. I've never been in a combat situation." "You wouldn't be in direct combat," Torres explained. "You'd be at the forward operating base, available for consultation and support if any of the dogs develop problems." Sarah's mind raced. The idea was both terrifying and compelling. She had never imagined her work would lead to something like this. "I need to think about this." "Of course," Rodriguez said. "But we need an answer by tomorrow. The paperwork and security clearances take time to process." As Sarah drove back to her hotel, she thought about everything that had led to this moment. 3 weeks ago, she had been working with suburban family pets. Now she was being asked to support military working dogs in an operational theater. She thought about Luna and the progress they had made together. She thought about Torres and how he had learned to adjust his leadership style. She thought about the entire team and how they had come to trust her methods despite their initial skepticism. Most importantly, she thought about the dogs and their handlers going into dangerous situations. If her presence could help ensure their success and safety, didn't she have an obligation to say yes? That night, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling, wrestling with a decision that would change her life forever. Outside her window, she could hear aircraft taking off from the base, carrying personnel to destinations around the world. Soon, Zeus, Luna, Atlas, Ranger, and Ace might be on one of those flights, heading into unknown dangers. By morning, she had made her decision. Sarah arrived at the base early and went directly to Rodriguez's office. She knocked on the door and entered when he called out. "Lieutenant Commander, I'll do it. I'll go with the team." Rodriguez looked up from his paperwork and smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. Welcome to SEAL Team 7, Dr. Mitchell." As Sarah left his office to begin the intensive process of preparing for deployment, she realized that her life had taken a turn she never could have imagined. She was no longer just a civilian dog trainer. She was about to become part of something much larger and more dangerous than anything she had ever experienced. The dogs were ready. The handlers were ready. And, now, ready or not, so was she. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation that Sarah had never imagined possible. Security clearance interviews, medical examinations, equipment fittings, and countless briefings about protocols and procedures filled every waking hour. The bureaucratic machinery of the military moved with surprising speed when necessary. Sarah found herself issued desert camouflage uniforms, body armor, and equipment she hoped she would never need to use. The weight of the gear was shocking. She had never realized how much equipment military personnel carried as a matter of routine. "You won't be in direct combat," Williams reminded her as she struggled with the unfamiliar straps and buckles of her body armor, "but you need to be prepared for anything." The dogs, meanwhile, seemed to sense the change in energy around the base. There was more activity, more urgency, and more equipment being moved and checked. Sarah was pleased to see that all 5 dogs remained calm and focused despite the increased bustle. Luna had continued to improve steadily. She wasn't back to her original confidence level, but she was working reliably and seemed to be drawing strength from Torres's newfound patience and understanding. The partnership between them had evolved into something deeper than it had been before the crisis. "It's strange," Torres commented during one of their final training sessions. "Luna and I are closer now than we were when everything was going perfectly. Going through this rough patch together made us understand each other better." Sarah understood what he meant. Overcoming challenges together often created stronger bonds than smooth sailing ever could. The entire team seemed more unified after working through the dogs' behavioral problems together. General Morrison returned for a final assessment 2 days before deployment. Sarah watched nervously as each dog handler team demonstrated their readiness through a series of complex exercises designed to simulate operational conditions. Zeus and Williams moved through their routine with the precision of a well-oiled machine. The partnership that had been strained and frustrated weeks earlier now looked effortless and natural. Atlas and Chin demonstrated the kind of confident teamwork that made both dog and handler look like experts. Atlas's natural confidence combined with Chen's relaxed handling style created a team that looked ready for anything. Ranger and Rodriguez showed how they had overcome the environmental sensitivity issues that had caused the shed incident. Ranger now looked to his handler for guidance when encountering unexpected stimuli rather than panicking and fleeing. Ace and Davis represented the success of patient development. The young dog had matured rapidly under consistent, positive guidance and now performed with an eagerness that was infectious. Finally, Luna and Torres took their turn. Sarah held her breath as Luna approached the first obstacle. The dog moved carefully but steadily through the course, checking in with Torres regularly for reassurance but never shutting down or refusing to work. When they finished, Luna's tail was actually wagging. General Morrison observed all of this with the stoic expression Sarah had come to expect from senior military officers. When the demonstrations were complete, he turned to her. "Dr. Mitchell, your assessment?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "General, all 5 dogs are ready for deployment. They're working well with their handlers and responding appropriately to stress. Luna will require some additional support and careful handling, but she's functional and reliable." The general nodded. "And your confidence in this assessment?" "High, sir. These dogs have not only recovered their abilities, but, in many ways they're better than they were before. The handlers have learned to communicate more effectively, and the dogs have learned to trust and rely on that communication. Very well. The deployment proceeds as planned. The night before departure, Sarah found herself in the kennels with the dogs one final time. Each animal was calm and resting, but she could sense their awareness that something significant was about to happen. Dogs were remarkably perceptive about changes in routine and energy. She spent a few minutes with each dog, not training or assessing, just connecting. These animals had taught her as much as she had taught them. Working with Zeus had shown her the importance of patience over force. Luna had demonstrated the fragility and resilience of trust. Atlas had reminded her that confidence was contagious. Ranger had taught her about adaptability and problem-solving. Ace had shown her the power of positive development. Nervous? Chief Torres asked, finding her sitting quietly near Luna's kennel. Terrified, Sarah admitted. I keep wondering if I'm qualified for this. Torres sat down beside her. You know what I realized during all this? Being qualified isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to learn and adapt when things don't go according to plan. Sarah thought about that. 3 weeks ago, she had been a civilian trainer working with family pets. Tomorrow, she would be flying into a conflict zone as part of a military operation. The transformation seemed impossible, yet here she was. Are you ready for this? She asked Torres. As ready as I can be. But, Sarah, having you with us, it changes everything. We know that if problems come up, we have someone who understands these dogs in ways we're still learning. The next morning came too quickly and not quickly enough. Sarah stood on the tarmac watching the dogs being loaded into the transport aircraft, each animal calm and professional in their specially designed travel crates. The SEALs moved around the aircraft with practiced efficiency, checking equipment and preparing for the long flight ahead. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez approached her as she stood watching the preparations. Second thoughts? Sarah considered the question honestly. Many. But not about coming with you. About whether I can handle what we might face. Dr. Mitchell, you've already handled more than you thought you could. A month ago, you thought you were coming here for a simple consultation. Instead, you've become part of a team that's about to undertake a classified mission in a hostile environment. Sarah realized he was right. She had already adapted to circumstances she never could have imagined. Perhaps she could continue to adapt to whatever came next. The flight was long and uncomfortable. Sarah had never been on a military transport aircraft before, and the noise, vibration, and lack of amenities were challenging. She checked on the dogs regularly, pleased to see they were handling the travel stress well. Halfway through the flight, William sat down next to her. Want to know a secret? Sarah nodded. This is my first deployment with a dog handler specialist. Usually, if we have problems with the dogs in the field, we just deal with it as best we can. Having you with us means we don't have to worry about losing a dog's effectiveness due to stress or trauma. How do you usually handle dog problems in the field? Williams was quiet for a moment. Sometimes we don't handle them well. We've lost good dogs to behavioral problems that probably could have been fixed with the right knowledge. Sarah felt the weight of that revelation. She wasn't just along to maintain the current dog's performance. She was there to help prevent the kind of problems that had cost other teams in the past. When they finally arrived at the forward operating base, Sarah was struck by how different everything looked from the clean, organized training facility back home. The base was dusty, temporary-looking, and filled with the controlled chaos of an active military operation. The dogs adapted quickly to their new environment, though Sarah could see they were taking in all the new sights, sounds, and smells with interest and some caution. She was pleased that none of them showed signs of the stress responses that had caused problems weeks earlier. Their first operation came sooner than expected. Intelligence had identified a location that needed to be searched for explosive devices, and the dog's detection abilities were needed immediately. Sarah watched from the operations center as the teams prepared to deploy. Zeus and Williams would lead the search, with Luna and Torres providing backup coverage. Atlas, Ranger, and Ace would remain at the base with their handlers in case additional support was needed. "Remember everything we've learned," Sarah told Williams and Torres as they prepared to leave. "Trust your dogs, communicate clearly, and don't let mission pressure override good handling." The wait was excruciating. Sarah found herself pacing in the operations center, monitoring radio communications and trying to stay out of the way of personnel who were running the mission. This was entirely different from training exercises. Real explosives, real dangers, real consequences. "Dog 1 has a positive indication," came Williams's voice over the radio. Sarah knew that meant Zeus had detected something. "Confirmed positive," came Torres's voice a few minutes later. "Luna concurs with Zeus's find." Sarah felt a surge of pride and relief. Both dogs were performing exactly as they should, working together to identify potential threats. All the training, all the relationship building, all the trust development was paying off in the most critical possible circumstances. The mission continued for several hours. The dogs found and identified multiple explosive devices, allowing the disposal teams to safely remove them. When the teams finally returned to base, both Zeus and Luna looked tired but satisfied, the way working dogs look when they know they've done their job well. "They were perfect," Williams reported to Sarah as they debriefed. Zeus was confident and thorough, and Luna backed up every find without hesitation. Torres was equally positive about Luna's performance. She was cautious but never hesitant. When she indicated a device, I knew I could trust her judgment completely. Over the following days, all 5 dogs had opportunities to demonstrate their abilities in operational settings. Each time, Sarah watched with a mixture of pride and anxiety as the animals and handlers she had worked with performed in situations where lives depended on their effectiveness. Atlas proved to be as reliable and confident in the field as he had been in training. Ranger showed excellent adaptability when operations took unexpected turns. Ace, despite being the youngest dog, demonstrated remarkable maturity and focus under pressure. But it was Luna who surprised everyone the most. The dog who had been shut down and fearful just weeks earlier became a model of careful, thorough work in the field. She approached each task with methodical precision, and her cautious nature actually proved to be an asset in situations where overlooking a threat could be catastrophic. "Luna's turned into our most reliable detector," Torres told Sarah after a particularly challenging mission. "Her careful approach catches things that more aggressive dogs might miss." Sarah realized that what they had initially seen as Luna's weakness, her sensitivity and caution, had actually become a strength when properly supported and understood. 3 weeks into the deployment, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. General Morrison had flown in to assess the unit's performance and, specifically to evaluate the success of including a civilian specialist. "Dr. Mitchell," he said, finding her in the makeshift office where she maintained records on each dog's performance and well-being, "I've been reviewing the mission reports. The dog's performance has been exemplary." "Thank you, sir. They're remarkable animals with excellent handlers. The handlers speak very highly of your contribution. They say having you here has changed how they think about working with the dogs." Sarah wasn't sure how to respond to that. "I think we all learned from each other, General." Morrison studied her for a moment. "Dr. Mitchell, would you consider making this arrangement permanent? The military could use more specialists like you." Sarah felt her world shift again. A month ago, she had been planning to return to civilian dog training after a brief consultation. Now she was being offered a permanent role in military operations. I need to think about that, sir." "Of course. Take your time." But, consider this, what you've accomplished here could be replicated with other units, other dogs. The impact could be significant. That evening, Sarah sat with Luna and Torres, watching the sunset over the desert bass. Luna was resting peacefully, her head on Torres's boot, completely relaxed despite the hostile environment surrounding them. "She's not the same dog she was when we started," Torres observed. "She's better. More thoughtful, more reliable." "You're not the same handler either," Sarah replied. "You learned to read her needs and support her strengths instead of fighting her nature." Torres nodded. "I keep thinking about other teams that might have dogs with similar problems. Dogs that get written off as failures instead of getting the help they need." Sarah understood what he was thinking because she was thinking the same thing. How many military working dogs had been lost to preventable behavioral problems? How many handlers had struggled with partnerships that could have been saved with the right knowledge and approach? As they prepared to pack up and return home the following week, Sarah reflected on everything that had happened. She had come to the base as a civilian consultant brought in to fix some problem dogs. She was leaving as an integral member of a military team, with job offers and opportunities she had never imagined. But, more than that, she had discovered something about herself. She was capable of adapting to challenges far beyond anything she had previously experienced. She was able to contribute meaningfully in environments that had initially seemed completely foreign. Most importantly, she had learned that the principles she had always believed in patience, understanding, communication, and trust were just as valuable in military operations as they were in suburban training facilities. The dogs had recovered their abilities and confidence. The handlers had learned new approaches that made them more effective partners. And Sarah had discovered that sometimes the most impactful work comes from saying yes to opportunities that scare you. As the transport aircraft lifted off for the journey home, Sarah looked down at the 5 dogs sleeping peacefully in their travel crates. They had been through a transformation that none of them could have predicted. They had gone from being labeled as problem animals to becoming essential members of successful military operations. But perhaps the biggest transformation had been her own. Sarah Mitchell, civilian dog trainer, had become Sarah Mitchell, military specialist. And she was beginning to think that General Morrison's offer deserved serious consideration. After all, if she had learned anything from this experience, it was that sometimes the most important work happens in the places you never expected to be, doing things you never imagined you could do.